Let's talk about cost. We've talked a lot about cost, but I mean, let's make sure that we pinpoint it because I think a lot of businesses are thinking cost first. Is private cloud the primary issue cost, or is it flexibility? Is something else going on there? Is cost make sense? Is private cloud all about a cost, or not necessarily? Greg, your take on that?
If you're doing it for cost alone, you're doing it all wrong. Everybody I've talked to, they're either leveraging cloud in general, public or private, for the agility of application development, right? Now, you back end from that, and costs do become a factor. I don't think costs can be ignored, but I don't think that is the primary driver. Recently HDS did a survey with The Economist about the drivers for cloud adoption in general. And the conventional thinking it was a move from CapEx to OpEx. And actually, that had dropped way down the list. I think it was the 8th reason on that list for cloud adoption. To me, if your first concern is about cost, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. It really is about developing an agile environment to deliver services in your IT department.
I want to hear what Matt has to say.
Yeah, seriously, and I want to hear what you have to say as well, Matt, too. But I think sometimes the C-suite gets nervous when someone says, "Well, it's not about cost; it's about something else, and the cost may be higher." But at any rate, Matt, your sense?
No, well, I think Greg's right. I think it's absolutely about agility. That's why these numbers around shadow IT are so high. And that's not just big companies. I remember at MongoDB when I was there that we took a poll of the systems that we had running, and then we had the executive team guess how many were running, and we were guessing like 10, 20, and I don't know, we had 100 or 200, I think, running. And so these are companies of all sizes, even nimble startups. But I think it's absolutely about agility. The question, I think, is whether over time, and I think actually, I don't think this is the primary argument for private cloud. I think if you were to ask, we have some people here, if you were to ask what's the primary reason that companies want to go with a private cloud solution, my guess is that money doesn't really enter in. I think it's more about control over data.
Exactly. Bingo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a canard, but I think that's the primary reason that people go with it. I mean, if you look at the big data breaches over time, they've almost entirely been private data center, not public cloud.
I think it depends on where people are in their journey, right? So if you're an enterprise type customer and you're looking at, okay, we want to give our developers this agile type environment, they're probably going to start by looking at private cloud because it's going to feel like what they're comfortable with, right? But the company that started at Amazon spending $85 and is now paying them $850,000 a month, they're going to look at private cloud and go, oh, okay, well, this is probably going to be cheaper for a certain part of that, right? I can take half of what's there and move it to something that costs less.
So cost is part of the equation at that level.
It depends on where you're at, though, where you're coming from.
Scott's absolutely right. I was just going to add that it's interesting because if you look at Netflix's latest financial reports, their subscriber growth...
And they're on Amazon, by the way.
What's that? Yeah, they're on Amazon.
Right.
If you compare their technology and development costs, which are pretty fixed as the company grows, it's 4x their subscriber growth, paid subscribers. So that might be sustainable for Netflix, which is a publicly traded company. They've got some cash flow models that are different than maybe your traditional enterprises are. But a traditional enterprise can't spend 4x on technology and development versus the revenues that they're growing. And it's not a sustainable model for most enterprises.
And I would say that the counterpoint though to cost is you have to, how much do you value what the strategic things your team is working on versus managing infrastructure and managing a private deployment. It's how much do you value those heads and what they're working on if it's not strategic and it's more just, table stakes, core stuff.
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
I want to look to the future, but actually back up just for 1 second. Greg, your example about the Netflix and the 4X, do you think it's a representative figure, or is that somehow idiosyncratic to Netflix?
Well, that was just for the quarter-to-quarter reporting. Over the last year, from what I could figure, it was growing at their technology and development expenses were growing at about 2x subscriber growth. So over the period of time, so it looks to me like it's ramping up. But obviously, with something like that, you've got to look at that over a longer period of time than I did. But to me, it was just a snapshot, right? Most companies are not Netflix. Most companies aren't Google. They don't have those scale problems. The problems they're trying to solve are different than the types of problems that Netflix and Google are solving. But there's some lessons to be learned there. I don't mean to disparage either of those. But when everybody drops their jaws when they look at the Netflix model and Chaos Monkey and all the tools they have available, it's really great, really cool, really interesting stuff. But how does that translate into the traditional bank or the Walmarts of the world, right? And how can they leverage that? What can they put?
Happy OpenStack customer, by the way.
That's right. So
you don't want to get me started talking about OpenStack. You couldn't derail me with that Adobe comment.
Matt, they're going to want you to be helping with the private cloud too. By the way, they haven't told you that, but you're going to be a consultant on their private cloud.
That's right.
Yeah.
Matt, I predict someday you will advocate for. You won't go private cloud. I predict you'll at least go as far as hybrid cloud.
Nice. Okay.
I actually, so on the Netflix example, I think their biggest problem is not how much money they're spending. It's that they don't ever have any movies that I want to watch.
Like that too.
I'm serious. I don't even know why we subscribe to it. I never get anything. But to that point that was made in there about, I think if I'm a company trying to, so I'm not Netflix. Most companies aren't Netflix. Most companies aren't Google. You're absolutely right. But most companies also don't know exactly how to solve the problems that they want to solve, which I think, to Scott's point earlier, and I don't want to misrepresent it, because I think, Scott, you feel like at some point, no matter where you begin, you ultimately should land on private cloud, at least for many of your workloads.
You should consider that you have many options of target.
Right.
The fact that it's in your data center or not almost shouldn't matter. Right.
But I think when you're starting, when you're trying to, again, thinking data science, when you're trying to think of what is the right question to ask, or I have this initiative that I think I want to do, I think building out the hardware infrastructure for that, whether you do it as a managed service or whether you build it out in your own data center, I think that's a bad idea. I think experimentation should be in the public cloud. I guess that's maybe the way that I would say it. And I would go so far as to say you need to constantly be experimenting, and so I would probably stay in the public cloud. What I don't know is, to those points about, and this comes back to Whitehurst's comment about it being obscenely expensive to scale in the public cloud. That might be true, but to Carl's point, maybe that's the trade-off. Maybe that for that agility, it's worth paying that extra money. I don't know that it is more expensive, but if it were, that agility might be worth it.
Look, Amazon is like a car rental, right? It's like Uber. It's like anything else, right? And at some point, you're taking enough Ubers that you're like, all right, it's actually worth not only just buying a car, but hiring my own private driver that is legitimately my private driver if I'm taking 300 Ubers a week, right? And
wait,
so,
do you have a private driver?
Wow.
Is that what you were just admitting?
They're waiting outside right now.
Private driver. He does.
So
I'm impressed, Scott.
My point is, like, if you apply that logic to other parts of your life or your business, like, yeah, there's plenty of companies that are happy to pay for just a tremendous number of Ubers for their employees. But at some point, you've got executives, you've got other people who are taking a ridiculous number of Uber drives, and it just makes sense to get them their own car, and maybe even hire their own driver. It just makes sense. And so that's the same debate that we have around, should I rent this by the hour in a public cloud, even if I'm reserving it, or do I go buy my own thing? You're going to do different things for different apps, different parts of your business, different geographies, different security concerns. And so I agree with you on the experimentation piece. You want to do that with the least friction and risk as possible. And so for many apps, many businesses, doing that in the public cloud first makes a tremendous amount of sense. It's what I would advocate for all day long. But for companies that have security issues or that just have scar tissue policy that they can't get around, what's your option? Not to experiment, or to have traditional old school procurement models for getting access to things? No, you're going to build a private cloud that feels as much like Amazon as it possibly can in terms of developer experience, and you're going to give your people what they're asking for.
And I want to add to that, James, because I think that the setup for this discussion almost sounds like a private versus public cloud debate. And it really isn't. I know from an HCS perspective, some of our largest customers are public cloud providers. We also have partners that are cloud service providers. We also have enterprises that are building their own private clouds. So from my perspective, and I'm pretty sure I could speak for Scott on this. It's not about either or. It's about adopting a cloud model that's best suited to your business objectives.
And being flexible.
Yes.
Like, I advocate for public cloud just as much as I advocate for private cloud. Right? It is about finding the right target for your workload and not being locked into this vision of I have to be all over here or all over here. Call it hybrid or not. Like, just adopt the mindset that I have many choices as to where to deploy my workloads and my apps, and I have more flexibility than ever in terms of how I automate that and containerize that and scale that. And why wouldn't I take advantage of every place possible to put that?